Hi everyone, here's what's bothering me today. A lot of us don't know about the brown bomber of Boogie Woogie, the Maharaja of the Keys, the Master of Swing, the man with four hands, and probably many other titles. All apply to the great jazz pianist Oscar Peterson. Now, I know not everyone here is into jazz, but for what it's worth, Oscar Peterson is one of the most famous jazz pianists of all time. And he's definitely well known in the music community here in Canada, but I know a lot of my audience is international, and I wanted them to know a bit more about some more of our legends. And if you're a musician, I think you could respect his hustle because Oscar Peterson released several albums every year. The dude was prolific. So let's find out a little bit more about him, shall we? So Oscar Peterson was the fourth of five children and spent a lot of his early life living in Montreal. His parents hailed from St. Kitts and the British Virgin Islands. And his father was a boatswain in the Merchant Marines, who then became a porter with Canadian Pacific Railway, and his mother was a domestic worker. Now, the interesting thing about Oscar Peterson's father was that he was a self-taught organist, and so he often led the family band in concerts and encouraged them to, participate in churches and community halls. And he insisted that all of the Peterson children, including famously Oscar, had to learn piano and a brass instrument. And then each one in turn would teach the next youngest child, which, I mean, on the one hand, that seems very disciplinarian and authoritarian, but I guess in Oscar's case, it definitely paid off. So Oscar Peterson began playing trumpet and piano at age 5, and he focused solely on piano at the age of 8 after apparently a long battle with tuberculosis. Because of this, by focusing on the piano, his sister, Daisy, actually became a respected piano teacher in Montreal's community and was also, in many ways, his instructor and really fostered his talent and ability. By training for the piano and learning different things, trying to get into more places to perform, he starts coming up against instances of racism. Now, in spite of this, Oscar Peterson still found great success. In fact, at the age of 14, he enrolled in an amateur contest, and he actually won the $250 first prize, which again, in 1914 is, or sorry, no, not 14, but in these early days of, the 40s, and when you're a teenager, that's a lot of money. So he starts building up more and more of an audience and begins to just really dazzle and impress people with his talent and ability. Like, heck, go listen to some Oscar Peterson right now, even if you're not really into jazz. Just listen to some of what he's capable of doing. There's a real talent here. So because of this, he quickly emerges as a celebrity in his teenage years, which forces him to drop out of school at the age of 17 to start focusing more on his piano career. And by this point, he's still really only famous in Montreal, but Montreal famously has a notable jazz scene, so this was really a good place for him to be. And here's where something that was said by his father turns out to be kind of prophetic. His father was skeptical of letting him leave school to pursue a music career, and he reportedly told Oscar, "If you're going to go out there and be a piano player, don't just be another one. Be the best." So Oscar went out and did that. Peterson made his first recordings for RCA Victor in March of 1945. His earliest recordings were I Got Rhythm and The Sheikh of Araby. And this is where he first gets his Boogie Woogie nickname as the Brown Bomber of Boogie Woogie. This is really just the start of a massive career, and I don't want to run through all that stuff because talking about all his albums and his career and who he's headlining with, he's basically with everyone who matters, and he becomes so incredibly famous and well known that his name is synonymous with jazz pianists to this day. Like, if you think of, jazz trumpet, you're probably imagining Dizzy Gillespie, right? Well, if you're into jazz and you think of the famous jazz pianist, Oscar Peterson is probably, or I'm hoping at least, one of the names you remember most. You know, he starts in Canada, and then after getting enough clout, word begins to spread. So then he gets an American introduction and just explodes onto the world scene. You know, Norman Granz became a close friend and was Peterson's manager until 1988. Peterson also formed trios with other musicians who had been performing with people like Nat King Cole. He accompanied the famous singer Ella Fitzgerald. And in classic Peterson fashion, he actually met while playing at a club in Washington, D.C., he met his idol, Art Tatum. And one thing I respect about Oscar Peterson is that throughout his career and touring throughout America, he never lost sight of the fact that Canada was his home. He often used it as home base and would still go out and travel and perform locally in places like Toronto and Montreal. And another thing that I respect about Peterson is that he had arthritis from a very young age, like since his teens basically, and yet he still went on tour internationally well into the 80s. The man is just so prolific and talented and capable, and you know, there's now even because of his fame, there's this statue of his outside of the National Arts Center that was opened and unveiled by Queen Elizabeth II herself. And there's a little, it's kind of fun when you walk by. There's this little sort of music recording of jazz that plays, and there's space for you to actually sit on the bench and take your picture next to one of the greatest jazz pianists of all time. I know there's even more I could say about him and, you know, his recording career and more of the people he worked with and how he came to be even more famous. His Hymn to Freedom is a really big one that everyone should check out. He was just so prolific, but unfortunately his arthritis eventually catches up with him, and he couldn't really continue performing throughout the late 1980s and ultimately had to retire and ended up dying not that long after. But he's very much an important figure in Canada's music scene. And I know with Canadian music, very few people tend to actually break out into the wider consciousness. Unfortunately, it tends to be people like Justin Bieber. But I wanted to tell a story about a Black Canadian for Black History Month, who is very much known and celebrated here in this country, and bring him to the attention of those who maybe never heard of him before, whether they're into jazz or not. Oscar Peterson is absolutely a legend, or, you know, he should be more of a legend in Canada. And unfortunately, the fact that he and jazz aren't quite as popular as they used to be, and the fact that this means that we don't know too much more about him other than that he is famous, I wanted to tell his story because not a lot of us know about it. And that's what's bothering me today.